Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming this morning. And there is the children's program going on this morning, so we have to end by 1:15 because they'll come in and present to us too, right? Good. So what I wanted to talk to you about this morning was something that I know, for those of you who've been coming over the weeks, have heard a little bit about in these past weeks about our kind of practice and study guide and the self-assessment questionnaire. How many people does that ring a bell? How many people does that not ring a bell? Good. So I will try to explain it for those who have familiarity with it and for those who are new. Basically, what we're talking about in this study and practice guide, and it is on the website, is really trying to articulate for both members of our community as well as the general public or anybody who's wandering about looking at websites, which I hear people do a lot these days. Sort of to take what we have been doing here for all these years, and rather than it seeming just a wide variety of many different teachings and practices of all types, all, to benefit people, to really see it within what we call a developmental model, okay, which I think is important. It's kind of like, we know where we are, and we know where we're going, and we understand how all these various teachings and practices, and if people are reading about spiritual matters and Buddhism and Dharma, you see there are many, many teachings, many, many practices, many, many different types of models, and it can often get confusing. And I think the important thing about entering a spiritual path of any sort is that things get clear. That things get clear. That the path is clearly delineated. The signposts are clearly pointed out. Because that is the reason we enter a coherent spiritual path. Right? Because left to our own devices, we cannot put it together in a way of any significance or meaning that really facilitates healing and transformation in a meaningful way. We get bits and pieces of this and that, starts and stops, advances, regresses, et cetera, which is common. But at a certain point we realize, no, I need direction, I need clarity, I need support, I need guidance. And so, that's why we look around, and that's why we hopefully find a spiritual path that gives us that. I found the Buddhist path, and I had great confidence in it because I realized very early on that it is a 2,600-year-old path that has been replicated, practice, with lots of experiments and lots of experiences and experimentation for all these years and generations, and it seems to be having the same power to heal and transform human beings today as it did from the time of the Buddha. I mean, that to me immediately gave me, this is something that I can have confidence in, this is something I can trust, this is a path I can follow. So in looking how we've put it together here in the Florida community of mindfulness, we call it a developmental path of healing, transformation, awakening. When you had us bow to the Buddha, you said, we're bowing to the Buddha, which is the capacity of all of us to be awakened. Oh, so that's what this is about. You see? That's what this is all about. It's about awakening. Oh, that's where I'm going. That's what I'm doing. That's what all these steps are about. And in bowing that way, it's really just an acknowledgement, a conscious acknowledgement of that's what this is about, and I appreciate that. Again, the idea of a developmental path is something I think that is very common in our society. We know about we know about the developmental path of children, right? We know that children, the infant goes from this helpless, totally helpless, dependent being that really doesn't have much more going for it than it's very aware, very purely aware, but doesn't have a lot of life skills. And so therefore, parents, friends, teachers, grandparents, etc., are very concerned about their development, right? That they roll over, that they begin to crawl. But again, we understand that while everybody may get a big kick out of their child or grandchild crawling developmentally, after a couple of months we go, well, what's next? You know, aren't they supposed to be picking themselves up, and then aren't supposed to be taking those steps, and aren't they supposed to be learning how to, you know what I mean? And so there's a whole developmental model, and then there's a whole developed model of language. There's a whole developed model of cognitive development. That we expect on the normal development of a human being, that's what they will go through. But we know over time that those kind of very basic but foundational skills that a child develops in those early years, those motor skills, gross, fine motor skills, cognitive skills, verbal skills, as that child develops, begins to move into grade school and into adolescence and into young adulthood, we really expect, we're not as concerned about their ability to move around the world and to talk. We're really more concerned about their social skills. What kind of person are they? How do they relate? Their decision-making skills. Their capacity for insight, for understanding, for analytical, logical thinking, their ability to understand causes and effects, something that seems to be seriously lacking in toddlers and adolescents, And if those of you who have not had adolescence, you can remember your own adolescence and remember how there seemed to be something missing of significance. But there are all kinds of developmental steps that we take from that just blob of awareness, that infant, to becoming an adult, we might say, in the best sense of the word, right? So we have a model of what that's supposed to look like. So we have a way of sort of assessing ourselves and other people kind of where they are on that model, right? I mean, we say about somebody who's an adult, they're very narcissistic, right? Which means they're totally self-centered. They only think about themselves. They only care about themselves. Now, again, when it's a 2-year-old who's a narcissist, we say that's cute, right? I mean, that's kind of right. But now at 35, they're doing the same thing, and it's no longer cute, right? So it's because again we have a model of that somehow. The human being, as it develops, is supposed to kind of open to the world, open to others, the way they relate. And, things like meaning and purpose, values, that were not significant for 5 or 10 or 15-year-olds become more significant in adulthood. Well, I want us to see the spiritual path as a developmental model. Okay, and the way we've delineated it sort of has 3 paths or 3 stages. And again, for the sake of conceptualization, it all seems fairly delineated, but in truth, it's, things merge into each other. And we know there are both children and adults who in some ways are very mature or grown up or wise, in other ways quite foolish or idiotic, Some places in life they act intelligently, and some places in life they act quite stupidly. And I think as human beings, we see that it's not just a developed model that's 100% pure at each stage, right? There's a complexity, and we all know within ourselves. And oftentimes, it's often difficult for us to accept the reality that our development, our human development, our spiritual development, is not smooth, coherent. But we find, again, there is a lot of incoherence, incongruence. Here we're this way, but over here we're that way. Sometimes we get it, and sometimes we forget it, right? And that can often be frustrating, but to people, or disappointing, and people could get, lose faith, lose confidence. But that's because they misunderstand the complexity of healing and transformation for most of us. So again, what we're proposing, and is this developmental model of healing, transformation, and awakening. Okay, and the way it's delineated here is, that we begin with a life of, and again, this is the words are strong, but it's not that simple. So we're talking like an exaggeration, a little hyperbole here. From a life of unsatisfactoriness, superficiality, emotionality, egocentricity, to a life of meaning, depth, stability of positive emotions, and selflessness. Okay, so this is one thing that, let's say, the Buddhist path has always had over, let's say, the Western psychological model. Okay, is that in Buddhism, what is essential, going back to the Buddha and his own Buddhahood. Again, Buddha is not his name. His name was Siddhartha. Buddha was what he was called, because he had come to full realization, and he was really living at the optimum of what it meant to be a human being. All the wonderful capacities of a human being were fully present in him. That's why he was a Buddha. He is the model. Okay, they're called Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, or there are lots of different names, but there's a model for mental health in Buddhism. Is that clear? It's not like Western psychology, where it's all about it's all about psychopathology and and kind of a lack of that. When you don't have all those psychopathological symptoms, when you're, it's like if you don't have any disease, that doesn't mean you're healthy, right? You see, and so Western psychology does not have that, traditionally, that model, right, of what it really means to be a healthy human being. What does that look like? Oh, it looks like a Buddha. It looks like a Bodhisattva. It looks like a Dalai Lama or a Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, it looks like something real. So it's not just theoretical. It's like realizable. It's very human, right? The path is not about becoming some sort of archetype, right? Becoming some kind of spiritual light, right? And transcending and lifting off into auras of astral realms, etc., etc. It is about becoming fully human. Okay, and so this is a path that lets us see wherever we are in our journey, there is a path to freedom, cessation of suffering, of delusion, of ignorance. And how to, those are big words, but when we think about, that means, emotionality, that driven always by negative emotionality, being driven by obsessive thinking and obsessive rumination and worrying, and a heart that's withdrawn, a heart that's walled off, not a heart, and the opposite is what? A heart that is open and loving, and one is at ease in life, and one is at ease with all beings, and one's mind is free of all emotional afflictions, and one's mind is at peace and open and spacious, etc. Can you see? It's about that movement, okay? And it is realizable. That's why we are delineating very specifically in this study and practice guide what that looks like at each of these three paths. And one of the interesting things that we've done, I think, which is kind of unique to way I think Buddhism is developing in, let's say, in the West or in America, is that I think there are two significant parts that were not very stated or present in traditionally Asian Buddhism for lots of cultural and historical reasons, is that the entrance, I think, for many people these days to a spiritual path, or even undertaking a spiritual path, is their own emotional healing. That therapeutic initiative that many people take on their own, or with therapists, or with groups, or recovery, all kinds of things, that many people are understanding their woundedness, right? Their woundedness, and are understanding that woundedness has to be healed. It is causing them suffering, right? The other, I think, very significant piece, and we're all, this is the Florida Community of Mindfulness, is that mindfulness, learning to live in the present moment, to be grounded, are pieces of human experience that we as Americans seem to have missed. It's like, what? There's a present moment, there's a non-cognitive reality that one can be present to, and then somehow that's very enjoyable, and maybe that's real and not our thoughts. I mean, just that whole process is like a great, we come out of the fog of our thoughts and our stories and the endless electronic stimulation. They go, oh, there's something else in what it means to be a human being and experience life. Is that clear? So in understanding that the ground of spiritual life, not in Asia, but for our society, seems to be this joint piece of personal emotional healing and stability, and sort of getting it grounded in reality through mindfulness, is the entranceway. And so therefore, we have called our first path the path of mindful living, right? Which again, I think probably most people who are here are familiar with that. Mindfulness is very popular. Thich Nhat Hanh and all his wonderful teachings on living in the mindful moment, his tradition, all the experimentation they have done with helping people learn how to live in the present and come back to their breath and learn to eat and drink and be mindful, emotional healing, etc. And the reason we delineate it as the first step in the path is because those who do not undertake that first often get frustrated, get disappointed. They go from one spiritual therapeutic path to another, or they work their darndest off in one spiritual path, working very hard, going to retreats, practicing a lot, and they wonder, doing these higher meditative teachings, why they still suffer. Why they're still not happy, why their relationships still aren't harmonious. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's often because this foundation work on emotional healing, basically developing an emotional self-awareness combined with the capacity to have some groundedness in reality, right, has not taken place. There's not a foundation that one can then build a spiritual meditative life on. Is that clear? Is there any questions about that? Again, in the guide, and we only have limited time here, in the guide it's explained, I mean, in each of the sections, not only do we have the purpose of them, but we have the teachings and the practices and the meditations and et cetera, that people will be doing at that level. But, and again, you've heard me talk before, there is a name to those people who want to skip over that. It's called spiritual bypassing. Anybody ever hear that term? Spiritual bypassing, right? We don't want to do that stuff, right? That's why we've come to Buddhism. That's why we've come to Dharma, right? Why? We want the higher teachings. We want to wake up. We want to be free, right? We're high achievers, right? You know, don't give me these simple, basic things. I mean, I've heard people talk to Thich Nhat Hanh and his teachings as Buddhism light. You know, it's like, I mean, have you mastered Buddhism light yet? But you might find it's a little heavier than you think. You know, again, it's easy to go, you know, these are the highest teachings, non-duality, non-self, emptiness, you know, I want that. But it's like, you know, it's like putting a first grader into high school. You know, they can maybe sit there in the class, right? Maybe, you know, but, you know, and again, there are many, many Dharma centers and spiritual centers where people are sitting there and they're practicing and blah, 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 blah. And yet, you know, the transformation never occurs in any meaningful way. And there may be many people in here who can acknowledge that and often wonder why it's, you know, I mean, it's not as if I haven't practiced and studied and blah, you know. Again, it's often this, what we're talking about. Okay. So this ground in mindfulness and mindful living, and this willingness to know that the emotional healing has to take place. Right? You cannot run the marathon with a broken leg. Sorry. Right? You have to heal that leg. Let it heal. Then you can begin to work up. Is that clear? So this is often, again, you know, we anyhow, you understand. Because it's about practice, it's not about intellectual understanding. I mean, the trouble with Buddhism in the West, its beginnings have historically been over these years, it attracts who? Thinking people, right? Now that's good because Buddhism has a lot intellectually to offer us, right? It's very profound intellectually. The problem is intellectually understanding concepts is not the same as really, you know, experiencing, realizing, living them, right? And that's the truth. And so that's why we have to give up our arrogance, give up our hubris, and really acknowledge, oh, you know, this is where I'm at, right? That's very wonderful. When we give up all concepts or ideas of who I'm supposed to be or how I should be or how I want to be seen or how I care about other people think about me, you know, that's all nonsense, right? That's just nonsense, egoistic nonsense, right? We want to get real. You know, this is where I'm at. Now that's a self-assessment question here we've developed. You know, it's like, how can I begin to see myself? Where am I really at in my spiritual life? And we, you know, again, these are all self-awareness. We should be asking ourselves these questions. It doesn't matter how many retreats we've been on, how many spiritual gurus we've taken teachings from, how much darshan we've had, how much bliss hits we've had, It's like what kind of, the person who wakes up with me in the morning, the person who goes through the day with me, how is that person? Are they at peace? Are they at ease? Are they open-hearted? Are they happy? Right? I mean, these are the kind of questions, and if not, well, fortunately, I found a path that can help me understand how to heal and transform. Okay. So, again, I'm just, So the second path we call the Dharma path. Now again, the mindful living path is the Dharma path too. I mean, it's not as if, the mindful living path is different than the Dharma path. I mean, mindfulness, the transformation of woundedness, into emotional stability. Again, Buddhism is all about one thing, the Buddha said, cessation of suffering. He said, I teach one thing, the cessation of suffering. So anything that is helping to remediate one's suffering is practicing the path of Buddhism. But we're kind of delineating that at this first stage, the focus is on, this groundedness and this stability of mindful living and emotional healing. Okay. Then the second path we're calling the Dharma path. Okay. But understand, the mindful living path is part of the Dharma path. But now it means more formally. Okay, one is undertaking the study and the practice of Buddhism. Dharma is the word for the Buddha's teachings and practices. And it really means, and again, because we know in our society today, everybody is practicing some kind of mindfulness, right? It's become a buzzword, right? So mindfulness, as well as emotional healing. Many people who aren't interested in a spiritual path or a path to awakening are practicing, right? So, and that's good. And that's why many people are just coming, because they want to learn more about mindful living and they want to learn more about how to heal their emotions. So that's good. So, but there may be some people who come to our community who want to kind of move along. Okay, there may be some people who may not. They're very happy. There's nothing wrong with mindful living. For those who are high achievers, there's nothing wrong with mindful living. Right? Some people, some teachers have spent their whole life teaching preschoolers, right? And find it very meaningful. Some teachers have spent their whole life teaching third graders. They find it very meaningful. Not everybody has to be a college professor, right? Is that clear? I mean, you need to be who you are, and you can find meaning and satisfaction at any level, okay? But in terms of our developmental path, which is just related to our own developmental path, the second path is called the Dharma path. It's a more formal entrance into a spiritual path. It's no longer, I want to just lead a more mindful life. It's now I want to lead a more awakened life. Okay? I want to understand more deeply what's going on in this world. Why do people suffer? What is the cause of suffering? Right? Why are there wars? Right? Why is there so much injustice in the world? Why do people treat each other violently? Right? Why is there, all these things, intolerance. Both societal as well as very personal. We want to begin to understand more what's going on in this life. Right? Change and permanence. What's this all about? Human suffering. What's this all about? How can people destroy their own planet? What kind of person would do that? So it's like answering these deeper questions about life and the meaning of life and why things happen the way they do. To me, that's where you're kind of beginning to want to enter a spiritual path. Is that clear? it's more than just mindful living. It's kind of a deeper entrance into the reality of our world, and also really wanting to really resolve in one's own being, one's own mind, this issue of one's own suffering, one's own egocentricity or self-centeredness, one's own sense of separation from life, from other people, this sense of separateness that so many people have, alienation. You know what I'm saying? That's to me entering the Dharma path. And again, here we have a whole body of practices and teachings and activities that one would undertake when one enters the Dharma path. And then, and then finally, we call fruition the third path, which is the wisdom path. And this is really when one is going beyond teachings and practices, so to speak, and really wants to understand the nature. This is Buddhism at its core. This is really the awakening. You know, what is real? What is my mind? What are thoughts? What is self? Am I really a separate self? Am I really an ego? Is there really such a thing inside me called a self, a Fred? Is there really something out there called a this or that? Or is the way I perceive the world diluted, not right, skewed, right? Because we know that going back to the Buddha's Great Awakening, and again, for those who've been around, I say, Buddha, Shakyamuni did not become Buddha because he read the book, because he took the course. Actually, there weren't any books around then. He only did one thing. He read his own mind. He introspected into his own mind. He looked deeply into reality, experientially, personally. That he really found that so many of the things that he thought and believed about himself and the world were totally incorrect. Right? And he didn't do it by reading the book to get a different view. He did it by introspecting deeply into his own mind. And we call that the wisdom path, where you really drink deeply. And again, on the path to Buddhahood, many different places along the way, many different, again, one can lead a very meaningful life with a GED, with a high school degree, right? One can lead a very meaningful life with a BA. Not everybody wants a PhD. I'm kind of using an analogy here. It breaks down at certain points. All right. But there are some people that the idea of a path to awakening, which is not only a path traditionally in Buddhism of personal transformation, of really being free from the inside, that within, in one's own body, mind, one feels free. There's nothing that binds one. There's nothing that constricts one. There's nothing that constrains one. One's heart or mind are totally open. And in that total openness to everything and to life, there blooms this wonderful thing that's called, compassion. A desire to be of benefit to other beings, desire to help, to alleviate the suffering of others, etc., to give protection to others. That sort of this kind of culminates in this selfless, we could say, selfless, no self-being, right? Who not only has awakened the full capacity of their heart-mind, but is actively, single-mindedly working to benefit other beings. We call that a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. That's the culmination of this path. And again, so this is kind of this path. Now, and again, the reason I'm going to touch on the self-assessment, because next week, both in St. Pete and here next week, there will be a panel of several members who will be discussing the way they've used this assessment to kind of look at their own practice and their own life and situation. So it's kind of in preparation for that. Actually, a number of our members will be away in this coming week. I don't know if everybody knows, but even though Thich Nhat Hanh is recovering from his severe stroke, actually he's recovering on the West Coast, his monks and nuns are leading a kind of a tour, doing various retreats around the country, and many of our members are going to the one in Magnolia Grove in Mississippi, and also I'm doing a retreat actually, unfortunately, the same weekend up in Southern Dharma in North Carolina, but we will have members here putting on this panel next week. So, because if there's anybody who often has a very skewed view of us, that person is primarily often ourselves, right? Right? Because, living in the world of egocentric narcissism, the way most of us do, we think what? Most of the time that we're right and everybody else is wrong. Right? We're good, everybody else is bad. We're smart, everybody else is stupid. We have the right values, everybody else has the wrong values, right? I mean, that's just the way we see things. So we are very skewed. It's very hard to get an objective viewpoint of ourselves. We don't have a mirror, right? The mirror doesn't lie. That's why lots of people aren't comfortable looking in the mirror, because the mirror doesn't lie. But to have a mirror on our own thoughts and feelings and perceptions, personality, to really see ourselves objectively is not easy. It is the hardest thing to say, right? So right now, right, if I wanted to know what my face looked like, I would have to what? Ask you. I can't see my face. I have no idea what I look like. Is that clear? Because I don't have that capacity. I only have you, or I have a mirror. Right? So that's why we need teachers, that's why we need spiritual friends, that's why we know all these things, to help give us a mirror so we can see ourselves clearly, so we know what needs to be worked on, what needs to be transformed. So having this kind of study and practice guide that I've just told you about, we fortunately have a member, Diane Powell, I know many of you know, who in her before she retired, was a research psychologist at USF. So she did this for a living. So she, based on this questionnaire, based on these all these three paths and all the various things as people are supposed to be developing in this path, she developed what we call the self-assessment, development model self-assessment questionnaire, which has some 27 questions. And in these 27 questions that are scattered about on a sheet of paper, 9 of the questions sort of relate to things that people should be getting if they're practicing at the mindful living. 9 of them are in the Dharma, and 9 of them are in the wisdom. Okay, and all of them, people are asked, to rate each of them from 1 to 5. Sort of like it doesn't apply to me, applies to me somewhat, or applies to me mostly. So it is not a scientific instrument for those of you who are used to such things, but it's a it's an instrument that is supposed to be helpful for people to begin to take a look at themselves, to start a dialogue with themselves. For those in the community who have mentors, a dialogue with their mentors, with their teacher, whatever, so they could get a sense of where they're at. Now, why is that important? Because it gives you a sense of, because in our community we have these things called intensives, we do retreats, we do all different kinds of activities to begin to know what do I need to be working on, right? Right? I love to read Dzogchen non-dualistic texts, but perhaps I should be reading books about self-healing, because inside I'm really still kind of a mess. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, it gets you, I love Dharma, I love to talk about Dharma, I love to come to meditation, but I don't have a regular meditation practice. I don't sit every day. I mean, I'll talk meditation till everybody I meet, right? How beneficial it is, how wonderful it is. Everybody should do it, but I don't do it regularly. Oh, well, that's, it's like stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? I mean, am I mindful during the day? Am I really present throughout my day to what I'm doing? Am I really focused on being more selfless in my life? Right? Being more open in my life, right? So these are the kind of questions that at each of the levels are being asked, so at the end of which a score, which is not an accurate score, because again, it's you notice it's called a self-assessment questionnaire. It means it's dependent on who? So again, I can have a self-assessment questionnaire with very clear questions, but also totally skew it, because how I'd like to think I am. Fortunately, again, the reason we do things like this is so helpful because, again, we could say, yeah, meditation's great, meditation's wonderful, it's the most wonderful thing, everybody should do it. Well, do you do it? Do you do it regularly, every day? And you can see the disparity, the discrepancy. Is that clear? And that's the important thing. Am I really applying it at work? Am I really applying it in my relations at home? Right. And so this capacity to be honest is a necessity. Because at the end of the day, if I present myself to the world, my colleagues, my family as this great spiritual light, right? And yet, the truth is, I'm really a great flickering spiritual light. Why present yourself one way if that's the truth? Right? I mean, who are we trying to kid? Who loses out on that? Right? It's funny, I remember my first teacher, Philip Kapleau Roshi, used to say that he said the real spiritual path, and again, he might have been quoting somebody else, I can't remember now, but he said the real spiritual path begins with the cry of help. It was very profound. It's like when we stop fooling ourselves, that we have all the answers, and I know the way, and I know what I'm doing, and you just notice, I really don't. I need help. I need support. I need guidance. I can't do this by myself. See that kind of openness? See, there's an openness. The other way, it's not open. When I think I have all the answers and I know what I'm doing and I'm clear and Nobody can tell me what to do, and I can go out there and I know I need that practice and I need that and I need that and I don't need that. And, well, who's saying all that? Is that an enlightened being with clear seeing and objectivity who's saying that? Or is that just your deluded self, your egocentric, skewed self, who's deciding what it needs? Right? But it's happy where it is, because that's who it thinks it is. It's never going to give you the right information, because it doesn't know what the right information is. It only knows what it knows. I mean, is that clear? That's why we need, that's why we need mirrors. That's why we need teachers. That's why we need guides. That's why we need even things like FCM Developmental Model Self-Assessment Questionnaire. So again, I just wanted to take some time to present that. We have a few minutes before the kids come. So questions, comments, critiques? Yes?
Is it true that if you haven't heard of this or you're new to this, that they can find it on the website under teaching?
No, this is actually, this is only for members.
Like a developmental...
Yeah, the whole path. Yeah, and anybody can just ask yourself the questions. I mean, the questions on the assessment, the reason we didn't publish the assessment questionnaire and just gave it out to members is because, it's not really a scientific instrument. It really just relates to our practice, the way we practice in this community. It may not relate to people how they practice in another community. So, it was for those kinds of reasons that we're not, widely publishing it. It's not that kind of deal. Right. But the paths, which I think are very sensible to anybody who's on a Dharma path, whatever tradition, could be interesting and beneficial. And again, because it's fairly delineated with practice and activities, just to ask yourself the question, do I do that? Do I do that? Where am I in that one? I think anybody could benefit in that way. Yes.
Thank you, Fred, for the Dharma talk and the overview of Buddhism. It ties in very nicely. You have been kind enough over the years to feed into me. My thinking mind is what got me into my situation, and therefore my thinking mind did not get me out of it. I needed to do something different. When you speak about this developmental model, which I understand is the way that we need to proceed, you talk about healing, transformation and awakening. Is that a sequential model, or can you come at it from different directions, or do you go through that sequence?
Well, again, I think if we began all at the same place, right, I think sequential model is probably most efficient, sort of like, we all begin in grade school, and then we all move on to middle school, and then we move into high school, and then, you know what I mean? So, and that's probably good, rather than, starting out taking a class at the first grade level, the fifth grade level, right? So I think from an educational point of view and a transformative point of view, to do it in a more step-by-step way probably is effective. But, if you look around the room here, we have people, right, many different ages, many different stages of life, many different backgrounds. So, where we're already kind of impure in that sense. Do you know what I'm saying? And so therefore, I would say I think it's a good developmental model. But if somebody's coming in and saying, well, I think I'm already pretty good at the mindful living, you know what I'm saying? I know I have to, there are some areas in there that I need to continue to stabilize, or there's some areas, that are so glaring, places of wounding or places of emotional reactivity, or there are certain areas of my daily life where I really I'm not mindful at all, right? But at the same time, I'm already asking the deeper questions about life and meaning and suffering, and so therefore, there are things in the Dharma path that also are meaningful to me and transformative to me. So I think, again, it's both and. So I think the idea of a foundation, the idea of a middle, and an idea of a culmination is a good sense of what this is about. But again, it is a little mixed, or it can be. Is that, or else we end up with going, with setting up our community like a university. Everybody's going to take the entry-level courses, and blah, you know what I mean? And then you move on to the 300s, and then, you know what I'm saying? And everything has prerequisites, which I just don't think would work because it's too fluid a situation. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Wait, just up there?
Yeah, I think you may have touched on this, but one important reason that it's available for members also, not non-members, is that in membership you have a mentor. And so what we found in the testing of the questionnaire, it's very easy for all of us by conditioning to go through a questionnaire and do it fairly quickly. And there are a lot of questions on there that may say, I understand this and I practice it regularly. And it's kind of easy to have a cognitive understanding of some of the questions and check yourself off. But the mentor process is so important. So that's why we really want it to be a membership tool. And if you are a member and you're going through it, I really encourage you to then sit down and review it with a mentor, whether you have a formal mentor or a peer. To just really do what Fred said earlier, to do a reality check, because it's only going to help us if we're really truthful about, I may understand this very clearly, but do I really practice?
Thank you. Any other quick questions? Yes.
You spoke of the emotional healing required for foundation. And you said that by doing retreats and intense practice is not necessarily bring that about. So where do we go? What do we do to make that happen?
To make that emotional healing happen. Well, again, I can't get into that today, Brian, but in that path, and working with a mentor and working with various kinds of the intensives, that's your focus. I mean, mindfulness means what? Being present. See, some people read certain things, they think, oh, mindfulness is about drinking tea mindfully, right? Well, that's very enjoyable. But there's also, going back to the Buddha's teaching in the Anapanasati Sutra, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of feelings, learning to be present, right? Learning to be present to your own suffering in a mindful way. Learning to hold that suffering in awareness. And learning to work with it with the tools we have, which are tools of understanding and the tools of compassion. It is a process, but it's definitely not a process of repression. It's not a process of denial. It's a process where there's total openness to to thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So that's a mindful path. Again, some people think it's not. It's like, again, that's kind of Mickey Mouse stuff. Give me non-duality. No, that's, mindfulness of thoughts and feelings is the core of the practice. Self-awareness. Please talk to your mentor. I think there's somebody at the door. Sort of feels like Halloween, I think I hear kids at the door.